Emmerdale spoilers for Monday, July 28 tease that a storm is brewing at Butler Farm, and at its epicenter is none other than Moira Dingle, a tough, proud girl who has recently been cornered by a cruel fate. Moira has survived much heartbreak, betrayal, loss, but now she faces not only a threat to her livelihood, but also a carefully calculated game of chess with a man who smiles as he plots, Joe Tate. Joe returned to Emmerdale under the radar, staying mostly out of sight and biding his time. But time was precisely what he needed to earn back Kim Tate's trust, and regaining Butler's farm was his entry ticket back into Home Farm's inner circle. Joe's plan wasn't about brute force. It was charm, pressure, and quiet manipulation, and Moira was his primary target. To the village, Joe's new approach seemed respectable, even magnanimous. He framed his proposal as a win-win. Moira could keep running the land she loved without the burdens of ownership. Be the heart of the farm without the headache, he told her with a carefully rehearsed sincerity. But beneath his polished veneer lay cold calculation. Ownership meant power. And Joe wanted it all. Moira wasn't easily fooled. But she was desperate. The recent environmental penalty from the council over the mudslide incident had crippled her financially. Fines mounted, and the damage to the land only furthered the strain. Suppliers began demanding payment upfront, and even her own family started whispering about selling assets. She put on a brave face, but each bill pushed her closer to a reckoning. Joe saw the cracks. He pressed gently, an invitation to dinner to talk things through, an offer to front her legal fees, should she consider the sale. Dawn overheard one such conversation and confronted Joe. "You're playing with her life," she snapped, but Joe only responded with a wry smile. "It's business, Dawn. And if she plays her cards right, everyone wins." Behind closed doors, Joe wasn't just plotting. He was pulling strings. Noel, a contact within the Water Regulation Board, had initially shown leniency. But after a private meeting and a thick envelope, Noel suddenly changed his stance. The fine would stand. No appeals. No reconsiderations. Moira would feel the squeeze until she had no choice but to sell. Joe's web was tightening. Moira grew suspicious. The timing of the fine's reinforcement was too convenient. She began trailing Joe's movements. On a rainy afternoon, parked behind a hedgerow outside the Grange Hotel, she saw Joe entering with Noel. They shared drinks, laughter, and a folder Moira recognized from her own paperwork. Her stomach turned. He wasn't just trying to buy her out, he was making sure no one else could save her. Furious and heartbroken, Moira confronted Joe the next day. He played dumb at first, offering sympathy instead of answers. But when she accused him of bribery, his smile faded. "You think I'd risk prison for a bit of land? You're giving yourself too much credit, Moira." That night, someone broke into Butler's farm. Nothing was taken, but fences were cut and livestock set loose. Moira snapped. Assuming Joe had sent someone to intimidate her, she stormed into the woolpack the next morning and decked him in front of half the village. "That's for messing with my family," she spat as he staggered back. But Joe, smug even through the blood on his lip, filed a report. Assault charges followed. And that's when Moira saw the real trap. In custody, Moira faced the possibility of a criminal record. With a pending case, she risked losing any remaining loans or grants tied to the farm. Joe returned to Butler's farm, this time with a legal notice and a warning: sell quietly, or face total ruin. The Moira of old might have folded, but the Moira who'd buried children, fought off blackmailers, and clawed her way through years of heartbreak, she wasn't done yet. Back at home, Kane saw her unraveling. She told him everything. His face hardened. "He picked the wrong woman to mess with," he growled. Moira shook her head. This one's mine. I need to beat him on my terms. And so began her counterattack. Quietly, methodically, she reached out to contacts, an old solicitor, who owed her a favor, a former council member who disliked Kim Tate's empire. With each phone call, she built a defense not just for herself, but a case to expose the corruption that had poisoned her life. Joe sensed the shift. He watched from a distance as Moira's posture straightened, her gaze sharpened. She stopped returning his calls. The next time they crossed paths, it was at a council meeting she was not supposed to know about. When he saw her there, seated beside Noel's supervisor, he knew something had changed. But Joe wasn't ready to surrender. The deal with Kim loomed large. Failure wasn't an option. So he doubled down. More pressure. More charm. A false apology, a bouquet of white roses left at her gate. Moira didn't even flinch. Kim, however, was growing impatient. Joe's delays were starting to look like incompetence. If he failed to secure the land, he wouldn't just lose favor, he'd lose everything. What neither of them knew, however, was that Moira's fight was about to turn public. She'd been speaking to a reporter from the Hot 10 Gazette, someone interested in council corruption and land pressure tactics. If the story broke, Joe's reputation, and by extension, Kim's, would take a massive hit. The battle for Butler's farm was no longer just legal or financial. It was reputational. And as Moira stood outside the Woolpack watching Joe from across the road, her eyes held no fear. Only fury and purpose. Emmerdale teases that tension is bubbling beneath the surface of Butler's farm, and the storm is only just beginning. The smell of damp earth lingered after the recent flood, a constant reminder to Moira Dingle that her life was falling apart, inch by painful inch. She walked the sodden fields alone most mornings now, her boots thick with mud and her mind heavier still with debt and guilt. The slurry spill incident had turned into a nightmare, not just for the land, but for her livelihood, and with the environmental fines mounting and no reprieve from the water board, she found herself staring into a financial abyss. Then came Joe. He didn't announce himself with the arrogance he once carried like a badge. Instead, he arrived with a calculated calm, draped in faux empathy and slick promises. Joe Tate, ever the strategist, wasn't just passing through, he was hunting. And Moira, she was the prey. His visits were frequent, always dressed as concern, often with veiled offers of help. But there was always a catch. Moira remembered the first time he mentioned the farm. His tone was casual, his words deliberate. "You don't have to lose everything," he said, his eyes gleaming beneath his concern. "You can keep working here. Just transfer the ownership. Stay on as tenant. It's a win-win." She didn't answer right away. Part of her was tempted. God knew she needed a way out. But there was something oily in his charm, something about the way he smiled that made her skin crawl. And she wasn't ready to give up the farm. Not Butler's. Not what she and her family had bled to keep alive. Joe, unfazed by her initial reluctance, played the long game. He confided in Dawn about his plan, sharing every twist of his manipulative strategy, as if it were a game of chess. He needed to prove himself to Kim Tate, to reclaim his place at her side. And he'd do that by delivering the farm into her hands. Moira had no idea how far he was willing to go. When the burglary happened, she'd been half asleep on the couch, the stress of the day knocking her out mid-sentence. She heard glass, then movement. Instinct kicked in. She grabbed the closest object, a wrench, and lashed out. It wasn't until after the police arrived that she realized who she'd hit. Joe. His blood on her hands. She expected fury, lawsuits, consequences. But Joe played it differently. He didn't press charges. He brushed it off with faux benevolence and reminded her that she was breaking down, that it didn't have to be this way. Just sign, Moira, he whispered. You'll still have everything that matters. It was only after a conversation with Kane that her alarm bells truly started to ring. Kane had never trusted Joe, and when Moira mentioned the fine from the water board, Kane dug deeper. He brought her the name of a man, Noel. A regulator, who had been oddly unmovable about waiving the farm's penalties. Kane's contacts unearthed the truth: Joe had paid Noel off. The fine had been weaponized. Moira reeled. All this time, Joe had been tightening the noose, squeezing her options until she had no path left but his. The burglary, the blood, the smiling visits, it was all a performance. And she'd almost fallen for it. She wanted to scream. Instead, she plotted. Joe didn't know she knew. That was her advantage. She began documenting everything. Meetings, phone calls, conversations she had with Noel. Kane got her a burner phone to record audio. She reached out to Dawn, too, feeling the cracks in Joe's plan might be easier to widen from within. Dawn was already hesitant, her conscience not yet fully numb to Joe's tactics. Moira played on that. She didn't need Dawn to betray him, not yet. She just needed to plant the seed of doubt. Meanwhile, Joe kept tightening his net, feeding Kim updates and assuring her it was only a matter of time. He had Moira cornered. She'd come crawling back, he promised. But Joe underestimated her. Moira wasn't crawling. She was climbing, quietly, steadily. Back toward the truth. She arranged to meet Noel again, under the pretext of negotiating the fines. This time, she wore a wire. She played innocent, letting him brag about the deal he made to keep the fines sky high. When he mentioned Joe's name, her heart nearly stopped, but her voice didn't waver. When the meeting ended, she had what she needed. That night, Moira returned to Butler's with a fire in her veins and a USB drive in her coat. It was evidence. And it was power. Joe showed up the next morning, all smiles and thinly veiled threats. Moira let him talk. Then she slid the USB across the table. "Game's over," she said. Joe's face dropped. He picked it up slowly, then laughed. "What is this?" "Some dramatic gesture." "It's the end of your scheme," she replied. "I know everything. About Noel. The payoff. The plan. I've got recordings, statements. You won't get this farm." Joe's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You think Kim will let this slide?" "I don't care about Kim. But I know you do. And if she finds out you nearly blew the whole thing by letting your ego get ahead of your brain." She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Joe left without another word. Moira turned back toward the fields, toward the future. She wasn't out of the woods yet. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she wasn't sinking. The war for Butler's farm had only just begun.